Buying the right equipment for any particular endeavour, whether it's sport, in the case of this case, racket sports, or if it's the case of making videos, my microphone, my camera, buying the right equipment for you is really important. So here I'm going to tell you 5 important things to consider when buying equipment. Now, most of these tips are applicable for all sports. All of them are applicable for racket sports, and most of them are applicable for other types of things. Now, I've called them the 5 important things because I may actually make another video of less important things to consider. I'm not really sure. On the screen at the moment is a summary of those particular points, those ideas, along with the times that you can find them. But there's also quick jump links in the text description, so you can click on one of those and be taken immediately to the link that interests you. So let's get started. Number 1. Now, I'm going to be using some rackets here, but don't think that they apply particularly to these rackets. But the tip number 1 is the most expensive racket in a brand or a model range is not necessarily the best racket. Now, that is a very general statement to make, but it is absolutely true. If we took off all of the markings and the names and we gave them to players and we didn't tell them anything, and I've done this, and you just said people which is the best racket, almost never do they pick the most expensive racket. Sometimes they do because that racket suits them. But too often people think that the more expensive a piece of equipment is, the better it is. Now, I can tell you now that if I had a huge amount of money, I would buy a new video camera. Not that this one is particularly bad, but I want some other features that this one doesn't have. But I can also tell you, I've used a video camera from Sony when I went to the YouTube studios that cost nearly £10,000, and there is no way I would buy that camera because I don't know how to use it. In the same way that if I had enough money to buy a Ferrari, there is no way that I would buy a Ferrari, partly because I'm not that interested in cars, but also because I know that I wouldn't really get the most out of it. It's like a learner getting in a Ferrari. They're not really going to be able to drive it properly. But if I was the kind of person who wanted the most expensive camera, or wanted a Ferrari, or wanted the most expensive racket, then that's fine. I'm not saying that, consumerism is bad. Consumerism is bad. But if you want to buy the most expensive racket, no problem. You've got enough money to do that? No problem. But it's not necessarily the best racket in the range. In fact, it's definitely not the best racket in the range. And more importantly, it might not be the best racket for you. And that's true of tennis or badminton or squash or anything. You have to find a racket that suits you, not the most expensive. It's a very simple idea. The most expensive is not the best, especially the best for you. That's it. I don't want to say any more. Tip number 2, and this is specifically to do with racket sports, but it's also to do with other equipment as well, I suppose. The lighter the racket doesn't mean it's better. Okay, that's really important. Now, I've got 2 rackets here, and they are, I think, actually, it is a coincidence, I promise you. I think that they are the extremes in the rackets that I have. I think that this is probably the lightest racket that I have strung with a grip on. Of all, I've got about 10 or 15 different rackets. And this is the first racket that I bought after I started playing squash after a huge break. And this is by far, this is like nearly 200 grams or so, 180 or something, whereas this is like 145. Now, this racket is without doubt, partly because it's my favorite racket at the moment, without doubt much better than this racket. But it's not just because it's lighter. And there is a habit within squash and perhaps in badminton, I don't really know, maybe not so much in tennis, about getting the lightest racket available, and manufacturers constantly advertise the lightest way they can. So for example, this is the Power Kill 110 SL. 110 grams is no grip, no grommets, and no strings. Now, some people like that because it means that they can consistently compare, because some strings are heavier than others. Some grommets, I suppose, might be heavier than others, and definitely some grips are heavier than others. Depends on how big you want your grip. So if you've got a baseline that every manufacturer works to, that's great. But the reality is that more importantly than the weight is the balance. And if you put heavier grips on, then the balance will change. So the simple thing is, Don't simply look for the lightest racket. It is not necessarily the best one. And we're going to get to a point where rackets become so light that you will have to be so much stronger. Yes, you'll be able to flick them very quickly with your forearm, but if you can't stop the racket head from moving when you make contact slightly off center, you're not going to be able to hit the ball very well. Now, as an extreme, imagine you took a badminton racket and you tried to hit a squash ball. Yeah, I suppose you could, but you're not going to be able to play great squash because it's too flexible. So there's going to come a point where we can make rackets lighter, but they'll become so flexible that we won't be able to play consistently good squash with them. So that's it. Don't think about the lightest. Of course, I'm not suggesting you go out and get a 200-gram racket because you'll be able to hit the ball really well, because you've got the reaction volleys and getting the balls out of the corner with your forearm and, at the front, having to lob. Heavy rackets make that difficult. When the ball is in the middle of the court, a heavier racket hits the ball beautifully. But squash is not always about in the middle of the court. So there we go. Don't think that light is the best. It is not. Tip number 3. Just because your favourite player plays with a particular brand and model doesn't mean that you will play better because you use that model. Even if you feel that you've got a game that is similar, both technically and tactically, to a particular player. It's not that simple. You could get two particular players who are very, very similar technically and tactically, and they would play with completely different rackets. Because what we feel and how we feel comfortable, that's so different from simply saying, well, when I hit my forehand, I look exactly like I'm a Shibana. Yeah, that's exactly. So I need to play with his racket. Yeah, by all means, go and try his racket. Definitely. Maybe even, play with it because it might suit you. But don't think that just because he plays with it and you love this particular player or you play similar, that you're going to have the same choices in rackets. You're not. You have to find something that works for you. And even in the basic idea of, is it throat? Does it have a throat? The open throat. This is an open throat. Does it have this, or is it more of a teardrop shape? Even those, situations, just because one player plays with a teardrop doesn't mean you have to play with a teardrop. And just because one player plays with a throat racket doesn't mean that you have to. And just the same as, in general, I like throated rackets, but I will always try throatless rackets, teardrop shapes. I will always give them a go. If somebody says, do you want to play with this? Yes, absolutely. I will play with as many different rackets as possible because I'll get a better understanding of those. So don't limit yourself on your favourite player, because the chances are you probably won't play your best squash with that particular racket. You will need something else. Tip number 4 is a little controversial, but most of the technological terminology is bull. Okay. Now, I used to work for a racket manufacturer. I'm not saying that all of the technology is false, because clearly rackets are getting better. I'm not saying that their particular way of explaining it isn't true. I'm just saying that remember that their job is to convince you to buy a racket. And again, I'm not, highlighting Ashaway in any particular way. In fact, they don't make any particular claims on this racket, but sometimes you see rackets and they say, oh, we've got this particular system for this and we've got this particular... Honestly, put all of that aside. What really matters is the quality of the materials and the quality of construction. Yes, the basic design is important. This particular racket doesn't claim to have anything, outstanding or new. It's just made with really good quality materials and it's made to a high standard. And that's what's important. Yes, manufacturers try to convince you to buy their rackets and they put different technology in, but honestly, most of it is just a load of rubbish. And all they're trying to do is convince you. It's just like you watch the telly, you watch the TV, and you see all of those adverts. Oh, our product does this and our product does that. Come on. Do you honestly believe any of that? No. So what's the way to counter all of that technological bullshit? Is to simply play with it. Does it feel good? Does it feel comfortable? Do you like it? Well, that's what's important. I have to stress, I'm not saying that all the technology that goes into rackets, whether they're badminton or any type of technology into any type of equipment, is wrong, because of course that's not true. We're getting better and better equipment, but don't believe everything that you see. Don't believe everything that you read. Sometimes there's a good scientific reason behind it, but whether that process or that scientific theory is applicable in squash, yeah, I don't know, or in racket manufacture, I don't know. But that would be my advice to you, is don't become too stressed about, but this one's got this particular type of graphic, and it's got I can't even think of any of the phrases now, and, don't believe everything you read on a racket or in an advertising brochure or on a poster. Play with it and see if you like it first. And the last tip is to do with your buying habits. Now, we've all got particular habits. Personally, I recommend buying slightly cheaper rackets and getting 2 of the same. I no longer play competitive squash. I will no longer ever play competitive squash. So I've got, like, every single racket that I've got, except 2 that were given to me, I've got different rackets. But if I were playing competitive squash, instead of buying 2 rackets that cost £125 or euros or dollars, I'd prefer, one racket for £125. I'd prefer to spend a little bit more and buy 2 rackets at £75, something like that, or €75. Because when you've got 2 rackets the same, if you break one and then you can go on court, your performance will be more consistent. So as far as this particular habit is concerned, think about what you do. Instead of buying 1 expensive racket, I recommend buying 2 slightly cheaper ones, but know that you've got 2. Another habit that you need to think about is brand loyalty. I'm not saying you shouldn't be brand loyal. I am incredibly brand loyal. When I find a piece of equipment or a brand that I really like, I buy more of that product, because in general I think that, I've got less to worry about. And it could be the same for squash for you. If you're the kind of person who likes Ashaway, or who likes, Technifiber or Babolat rackets or whatever particular brand, don't worry about being brand loyal, but be brand skeptical. And what I mean by that is always take the opportunity to play with other people's rackets, use other types of equipment, use other cameras or microphones, whatever we're talking about. Say, yeah, I'm going to buy these rackets because I really like them. They've got good quality control. They really work for me. They're very consistent. Great. Keep doing that. But always be open to other ideas. Play with different rackets as you can. And I've mentioned that a couple of times already in this particular video. Be brand loyal, but also be brand skeptical. Now, the next thing to do with brand buying habits is think about the time that you buy your racket. If you are the kind of person who likes to have a couple of rackets, be careful about buying at the end of a season, because you might find that racket has been discontinued. And that can be really difficult for when people, and I've been on Reddit where people are saying, has anybody seen this particular racket? I can't find it anywhere. It's my favorite racket. If you find a racket that you love and then you can't buy it, that's pretty annoying, that is, because then you feel you have to go through a whole new process of finding one that you really like. So think about the time that you buy them. If you can afford it and they're on sale, and you feel that this is a good racket, that's great. Don't be one of those people who has to buy a new racket every season because you think that they get significantly better, because that's not true. If you found a racket that works really well for you, use it as long as you can, until you've tried everybody else's racket and you find something that is significantly better. Maybe you'll find one that's a little bit better, but don't worry about that. Don't have to sell all of your rackets to get on. You've got one that works really well. Keep it until you have to, buy a new one. Another thing that I've already mentioned in this video about rackets shape is shape loyalty. Don't feel that you have to be stuck with a throated racket because you tried a couple of throatless but you really didn't like them. I'm not saying go out and buy a throatless racket. I'm saying try them. Don't be stuck in one particular shape of racket. Just the same as you shouldn't be stuck in one particular brand. Keep using it. but that's fine. But be open to it and be open to the other types of shapes available. Now, of course, I've made it black and white. I've said it's either throated or it's teardrop, but it's not that simple because sometimes you've got like a throat here. Technically, yeah, I suppose it's got a throat, but really it's not really a throat, is it? So be open to all of those types of things. So the summary of the the buying habits is don't necessarily buy one expensive one. Think about buying two the same that are a little bit cheaper. Don't stick with one brand all of the time. Be open to other brands. Don't stick with one shape all of the time. Be open to other shapes, and think about the time of year that you buy it, because if you've got a racket that you really like and it's on sale and you can afford it, seriously consider getting it so that you can keep using it. But if you buy at the end of the season and then you love it, you might find that you can't get a new that's the same one because it's sold out. And don't necessarily buy at the beginning of every season thinking that buying a new racket is the best thing for you to do every single season. You don't need to do it. Well, there we go. Those were the 5 important things to consider when buying a racket. On the screen at the moment is a subscription button. If and only if you think my content is useful, please consider subscribing. There's also a playlist of the other 5 things videos, plenty of different types of videos there. And there's also a video that YouTube thinks is a really good fit for you based on what you've been watching. And remember, do something every single day to improve your squash. See ya.